Imagine enjoying a peaceful afternoon by your private pool when suddenly BAM, your neighborhood's self-proclaimed HOA dictator, Karen, shows up demanding access to your property. Armed with a clipboard, fake rules, and an overinflated sense of authority, she insists your pool should be open to the entire neighborhood. When I refuse, she loses it, calling the HOA, threatening legal action, and even dialing 911. But what happens when we turn the tables and expose her for breaking the very rules she enforces? Let's just say, karma comes splashing down in the most satisfying way possible. The neighborhood was peaceful, the kind of suburban haven where families barbecued on weekends, kids rode their bikes on the cul-de-sac, and the only real danger was an occasional rogue squirrel darting across the street. It was a place where people generally minded their business, except for one person. Karen. She wasn't just any neighbor. She was the self-appointed queen of the HOA, a woman on a mission to uphold the rules, whether they existed or not. With a clipboard in one hand and an ever-present scowl, she treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom, where she alone decided what was acceptable. For the most part, I had managed to avoid any direct confrontations with her. Sure, I had seen her harassing other homeowners over trivial things, a mailbox being an inch too tall, a front yard gnome that clashed with the aesthetic of the neighborhood, a car parked on the street for longer than she deemed reasonable. But I had remained relatively unscathed, enjoying my little slice of tranquility behind the tall privacy fence that surrounded my backyard. Then came the day she set her sights on me. It all started with a seemingly innocent pool day. The weather was perfect, blue skies, a slight breeze, and the sun shining down just enough to make the water inviting. I had just settled into my pool chair with a cold drink when I heard the unmistakable sound of Karen's footsteps approaching my fence. I knew those steps well, the deliberate, authoritative march of someone who was about to cause problems on purpose. Then came the voice. "Excuse me," she called, her tone dripping with the usual condescension. "We need to talk." I sighed, setting my drink down before walking over to the gate. There she was, standing on the sidewalk with her ever-present clipboard and an expression of disapproval that could curdle milk. "Yes, Karen?" I asked, bracing myself for whatever ridiculous complaint she had prepared. Her eyes flicked past me to the shimmering pool behind the fence, and I could already see where this was going. "I've noticed you have a pool," she said, as if I had somehow been keeping it a secret. "Yep," I replied unbothered. "Had it for years." She pursed her lips. "I don't recall seeing a community access sign. As an HOA member, I believe this should be available for all residents to use." I blinked. For a moment, I genuinely thought she was joking. But Karen didn't joke, at least not intentionally. I let out a short laugh. No. This is my private property. The HOA has no say over my pool." She bristled. "We are a community, and it would be fairer if all residents had equal access to such amenities." I stared at her, half expecting hidden cameras to pop out. Was this a prank? No one could possibly be this entitled. "That's not how private property works," I said, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. Her face reddened. "I'm going to have to report this to the HOA. There are rules about community engagement." "Show me the rule that says I have to share my personal pool," I challenged, crossing my arms. Karen fumbled with her clipboard, flipping through pages as if she were searching for a non-existent regulation. When she didn't find what she was looking for, she sniffed indignantly. "It's about the principle." I didn't bother responding. I simply turned and walked back to my chair, leaving her standing there, fuming. A reasonable person would have taken the hint. But Karen? No, she was just getting started. The next morning, I woke up to an official-looking notice taped to my front door. In big, bold letters, it read, "HOA Violation Notice. Unapproved use of community resources." I stared at it for a moment, trying to process the sheer audacity of Karen's latest stunt. My pool, my privately owned, personally maintained pool, was now apparently considered a community resource? Chuckling to myself, I grabbed the paper and marched straight to my kitchen, pouring a cup of coffee before settling into a chair to properly read the nonsense she had drafted. It was riddled with vague threats about HOA compliance, non-existent fines, and something about mandatory availability of recreational facilities. If it weren't so absurd, I might have been annoyed. Instead, I found it hilarious. Ignoring the notice entirely, I went about my day. But Karen wasn't one to let things slide. By noon, she was back. This time, she had company. Another HOA board member, Rick, A man who looked like he regretted every life choice that had led him to this moment, stood beside her, holding a copy of the notice with an apologetic expression. Karen, on the other hand, was in full dictator mode. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on the bridge of her nose, she looked like she was about to conduct a military inspection. I opened the door, already amused. "Morning, Karen." "Rick." Karen wasted no time. "We're here to discuss your noncompliance with HOA policies." Rick sighed. "Look, man, this isn't really." Karen shot him a glare so intense that he instantly clammed up. I leaned against the doorframe, sipping my coffee. "Which policy exactly?" She thrust the notice forward like it was a subpoena. "Your pool." I nodded. "Yep. Still mine." "You are required to provide equal access to all residents," she insisted. "Show me the rule." Karen's eye twitched. "The rule is about community unity. You are creating division by keeping exclusive access to an amenity that could benefit everyone." I snorted. "So, let me get this straight. You want me to open my private pool, on my private property, to the entire neighborhood because you think it's unfair that I have one?" "That's exactly right," she said, crossing her arms. I grinned. "No." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Rick, at least, had the decency to look embarrassed. "Look, dude, I tried telling her that's not how any of this works, but I will be escalating this to the highest authority," Karen snapped. "Expect further action." With that, she spun on her heel and marched away, dragging Rick with her. I watched them go, shaking my head. Karen wasn't just on a power trip. She was building up to something bigger. And I had a feeling this wasn't the last I'd hear of it. Later that afternoon, I decided to take a break from work and enjoy some well-deserved relaxation by the pool. I grabbed a cold drink, stretched out on a lounge chair, and let the sun do its magic. But, of course, Karen had other plans. Just as I was settling into blissful peace, I heard an exaggerated throat-clearing sound from beyond the fence. I sighed before even turning my head. Sure enough, there she was, standing at the edge of my property, arms crossed, face pinched with self-importance. "Still refusing to be a good neighbor, I see," she said with an air of dramatic disappointment. I didn't even bother sitting up. "Yep," Karen huffed. "You're being incredibly selfish. Think of the children in this neighborhood who don't have access to a pool." I raised an eyebrow. "The community has a pool, Karen. 2 blocks over. HOA maintained, just like you like it." "That pool is crowded and noisy," she sniffed. "Yours is much more private." I smirked. "Exactly." Karen's jaw clenched. "You don't own this neighborhood. You can't just make up your own rules." I sat up slightly. "Funny, that's exactly what I was about to say to you." Her face turned red. "I am trying to keep this neighborhood respectable. By trespassing on my property and demanding access to my pool?" "I am not trespassing," she snapped. "I am merely standing on the sidewalk, concerned about a fellow HOA member's unwillingness to participate in the spirit of community." I took a sip of my drink. "Karen, you're obsessed with rules, right?" "Of course." "Well, guess what?" I said, gesturing toward the locked gate. "There's a very clear rule about private property. This pool is mine. No one else's. End of discussion." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "Fine. If you refuse to be reasonable, I have no choice but to escalate this matter further." She pulled out her phone and snapped a picture of my pool. I raised an eyebrow. "Did you just take evidence of a thing I legally own?" "You'll see," she said smugly. "You brought this on yourself." With that, she stormed away, leaving me both confused and entertained. I figured she'd send another fake HOA notice, maybe even throw a tantrum at the next board meeting. What I didn't expect was how far she was willing to take it. Because Karen, in all her unhinged glory, was about to do something no one saw coming. That evening, the neighborhood group chat exploded with activity. Normally, it was a quiet space for people to post lost dog notices, recommendations for plumbers, or the occasional passive-aggressive complaint about teenagers playing loud music. But tonight, it was all about Karen. Apparently, she had gone door to door, rallying support for her latest crusade. Asterisk forcing the community to have equal access to my pool. Asterisk. Her argument? That my refusal to share it was somehow hurting neighborhood morale and dividing the community. Most of the neighbors weren't taking her seriously. Some found it hilarious, others were just exasperated, and a few egged her on purely for the entertainment value. Tom, my next-door neighbor, sent me a private message. Tom asterisk, bro. She came to my door with a petition. A petition? Said you were hoarding resources. I told her to go petition the sun for more daylight hours if she wanted to be mad at something. I nearly spit out my drink. Me asterisk, please tell me someone signed it. Tom asterisk, oh yeah. Jeff did, but only because he wants to see what happens when you tell her to go kick rocks. I sighed. Jeff was the neighborhood agent of chaos. Of course he would encourage this madness. Later that night, while grilling in my backyard, I overheard a few neighbors talking at the fence. She tried telling me my lawn chairs were a violation because they weren't visually cohesive with my house, one woman whispered. My God, another replied. Last week, she wrote me up for a decorative crime. A decorative crime? What does that even mean? Tom chimed in. I caught her measuring my grass with a ruler. I swear, she had a whole spreadsheet of violations. I told her if she wanted to be that obsessed with turf, she should work at a golf course. We all laughed, but there was a clear undercurrent of exhaustion. Karen had been a neighborhood menace for too long. That's when an idea hit me. If Karen wanted to play enforcer, maybe it was time to turn the tables. Because if she was going to dig into everyone's business, it was only fair that we started looking into hers. And something told me Karen wasn't quite as rule-abiding as she wanted everyone to believe. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. If Karen wanted to wield the HOA rulebook like a weapon, it was time to check if she was actually following the same rules she imposed on everyone else. I wasn't alone in this mission. After last night's chat, several neighbors were more than happy to help. The general consensus? Karen had been making life miserable for too long, and if she was breaking even a single HOA rule, we were going to find out. Tom, ever the instigator, was the first to dig into the HOA bylaws. All right, he said, flipping through a thick binder over coffee at my place. Let's see what Karen the enforcer might be violating. The discoveries came quickly. First, her fence was taller than HOA regulations allowed. The same fence she had once reported another neighbor for exceeding by half an inch. Second, her front porch had an unapproved decorative wreath. HOA rules stated that all exterior decorations had to be pre-approved. She had fined another resident for hanging a holiday banner without permission. Yet there was a giant seasonal wreath hanging proudly on her door. And then there was the big one. She's been parking her car on the street overnight, Tom said with a wicked grin. That's an actual violation. I raised an eyebrow. You're telling me Karen, queen of the rulebook, has been breaking one of the biggest HOA rules? Oh yeah, Tom said, snapping a picture from across the street. And I know she's reported people for this exact thing. With the evidence gathered, we waited for the perfect moment. That moment came at the next HOA meeting. Karen strutted into the clubhouse like she owned the place, binder in hand, ready to launch her latest attack. She wasted no time diving into her usual theatrics. I want to formally address a major issue in our neighborhood, she announced dramatically, flipping through her notes. We have a resident who is actively refusing to contribute to the community spirit. A resident who is hoarding resources. Karen, the HOA president sighed, already exhausted. Are you still talking about the pool? Yes, I am, she snapped. And I won't stop until something is done. That's when Tom cleared his throat. Actually, I'd like to bring up a few other rule violations. Karen froze. Excuse me? Tom slid the evidence across the table. Fence height violation. Unauthorized decorations. Illegal overnight street parking. The room went silent. Karen paled as the HOA president flipped through the evidence. Karen, this is all true? Aye, she spluttered. I didn't know. The rules are the rules, right? I said, barely suppressing my grin. For the first time ever, Karen had nothing to say. Then came the best part. The HOA president sighed and reached into her folder. Karen, due to these repeated violations, you'll be receiving fines for noncompliance. Silence. Then, a single snort of laughter from Jeff, who clearly couldn't hold it in anymore. And just like that, Karen's reign of terror was over. Karen sat frozen, her face shifting through several emotions: shock, disbelief, rage, and finally, utter humiliation. For someone who had spent years terrorizing the neighborhood with petty complaints and outrageous rule enforcement, being caught red-handed was an unimaginable blow. The room remained silent for a moment as the HOA president finished writing up Karen's official violation notices. Then Tom, who had been waiting for this moment, decided to twist the knife just a little more. So, Karen, he said, leaning back with a smirk, how does it feel to be non-compliant? Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time ever, she was speechless. The HOA president cleared her throat. Now, Before we move forward with any further neighborhood disputes, I think it's important we address another issue. She turned to Karen. You've been overstepping your role in the HOA, issuing unofficial warnings and fabricating non-existent rules. That is not your job. Karen's mouth clamped shut. In light of this, the president continued, I'm calling for an immediate vote to remove Karen from any and all HOA leadership roles. A murmur swept through the room. Then, one by one, hands shot up in favor of the motion. Karen's face turned a deep shade of red as she watched the votes roll in. I kept my hand down. Not because I didn't want to vote her out. I did, but because I was enjoying the look of sheer horror on her face too much to distract myself. The count was final. Karen was officially out. No, she stammered. You can't just. It's done, the HOA president cut in, finalizing the decision with a firm nod. Karen, you are no longer permitted to enforce, interpret, or distribute HOA guidelines in any capacity. Karen looked around, expecting someone to come to her defense. But the neighbors she had bullied and harassed for years were now smirking, whispering, and celebrating her downfall. It was poetic justice. Her hands trembled as she gathered her papers and stormed out of the room, mumbling something about calling a lawyer. But we all knew the truth. Karen had lost. And nothing was going to change that. As soon as the door slammed shut behind her, the room erupted into quiet chuckles and murmured excitement. The neighborhood was free. Tom leaned over and clinked his water bottle against mine. Now that's what I call karma. A week after Karen's spectacular downfall, the neighborhood felt different. Lighter. Freer. It was as if a storm cloud had finally lifted, and everyone was breathing easier knowing they wouldn't wake up to a bogus HOA violation notice on their door. The group chat was still buzzing about her exit. Tom * can't believe it actually happened. Karen is officially dethroned. Jeff * bro, did you see her face when they handed her own violation notice? Priceless. Lisa * I put up a flamingo in my front yard just because I could. Feels liberating. And perhaps the best update of all? Karen had gone quiet. No clipboard. No passive-aggressive notes. No fake fines. At first, people thought she might be plotting a comeback. But then, rumors started spreading that she was moving. Whether it was out of embarrassment or just sheer defeat, no one really cared. The neighborhood was ready to throw a party the second the moving truck arrived. One evening, as I was grilling in my backyard, I heard a familiar voice over the fence. Tom. Hey man, got something for you. I turned, and he tossed something over. I caught it and flipped it over in my hands. A laminated copy of Karen's infamous HOA violation notice against my own pool. I laughed. You laminated it? Of course. It's a piece of history now. I shook my head, setting it down on the patio table. So what happens now? No more HOA drama. Tom smirked. Oh, I'm sure someone else will step up eventually. But no one will ever be as bad as Karen. I raised my drink in a mock toast. To a Karen-free neighborhood. We clinked bottles and enjoyed the quiet. As I stretched out in my chair, looking out at my private pool, I let out a satisfied sigh. For the first time in a long time, peace had returned to the neighborhood. And if another Karen ever tried to rise up, well, I'd be ready. What would you have done if Karen demanded access to your private pool? What's the most ridiculous HOA rule you've ever heard of or had to deal with? If you had a neighbor like Karen, would you try to reason with her or fight fire with fire? Do you think Karen learned her lesson, or is she the type to double down on her entitlement? If you enjoyed watching Karen get a taste of her own HOA rules, don't forget to smash that like button. Seriously, it helps more than you know. And if you love juicy HOA drama, entitled neighbor meltdowns, and satisfying karma, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Eyes collision. Also, drop a comment below. Have you ever dealt with an HOA Karen? Let's hear those wild stories. See you in the next one. Rocket fire.